technically they're all correct names. That's a conversation for another time. But basically, they are a type of anglerfish. So anglerfish are an order of fish, and there are different families within that order. And so one of those families, Antineridae, is frogfish. A simple way to explain it, all frogfish are anglerfish, but most anglerfish are not frogfish. And as you can see in that photo, he's got a nice, pretty lure sticking out, really showing you why he is an anglerfish. And although we know frogfish and a lot about them, there's a book that just came out called Frogfishes by Dr. Ted Peace. I have the old version from 30 years ago. The new one just came out, and it's got really cool information in it, such as this drawing right here, which is the first ever drawing on record of a frogfish. So this is from Brazil in about 1630, somewhere around that time period. And as you can see, you don't have to be an expert. That's definitely a frogfish. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. And one of my favorite things about frogfish is they have gills basically in their armpits. And you'll notice on their body, they've got the two sets of fins, and the larger fins on the side, they've got those big old holes right there behind each fin. And those are the gills. Water goes in through the mouth and out through those gills, and they can use those for locomotion. They come in all shapes, colors, sizes. This is my absolute favorite one, and covered in polka dots. And just check out the fingernails on that guy. It's got a nice little dinosaur pedicure going on. Some covered in lots of hair. Unfortunately, there's no diving right now. I can't see any, but I've got friends a couple minutes away that have got some hairy frogfish in their front yard. So froggies are still around, nothing stopping them right now. So some of these frogfish can come covered in hair. Some of them covered in stripes, like the famous psychedelic frogfish. Some are very, very small. And if you come to Dauin in the beginning of the year, normally between about January and March or April, you're going to find a lot of frogfish this size, roughly about 8 millimeters, because Dauin is a nursery for these frogfish. So for a few months a year, we get tons of babies showing up almost every single day. Some are really, really big. We've got some pretty giant ones here in Dauin, but this one's from a lure that I took last year, and it's been there for about 3 or 4 years, and it's like a big basketball. She's a very, very massive frogfish. So anywhere from around maximum size of 3 centimeters to this one, which was roughly about 40, 45 centimeters. This one I found next to a trash wrapper of a 3-in-1 coffee. So maybe he wanted a little morning boost. I think he's just in the middle of some dark brown sands, and this was his only refuge. We didn't take the plastic away, but when we went back a few days later, frogfish wasn't there, so then we took the plastic out. We didn't want to take them home when it was still in use. Sometimes you'll find frogfish with other species, although this is normally just by chance. I call this the Bluetooth pipefish. You've got the giant orange frogfish in the middle of the screen, and just below his face, you can see a nice banded pipefish. That's a pretty common critter here in Dauin, so most of you can probably use that as a nice size reference for this frogfish. Like I said, it's pretty much chance when they're together, but just a little background on this shot. I was following something called a file snake, and as I was photographing it next to a rock, this pebble started moving. Long story short, it bumped this frogfish out of its place, so it went back and perched on top of the file snake, which was probably a 1 in a million chance to see that. Basically, they come in all different colors, shapes, and sizes. These are the 9 main species here in Dauin, and we'll go over those at the end of the presentation. But just to show you, that's 9 different species. They look very similar, but if you look closely, each one looks a little bit different. This is a drawing of a painted frogfish. This is what I call your average frogfish because it's very, very common and the most normal shape of all the frogfish. As you can see, it's got a nice rod and lure in the front of the face and then the 2 spines above the eye. So it's got 3 spines, but the first spine has evolved into a rod and lure, which is where the name anglerfish come from. Depending on what genus or species of frogfish you have, these are going to be different shapes and are used in identification. If you look at the body, this one's got a few polka dots, but like I showed earlier, there are plenty of other body patterns you can see. As for the fins on the side, you have a pair of pelvic fins and a pair of pectoral fins. The pelvic fins are going to be the very small fins that you can't see really, that are underneath the frogfish, and the pectoral fins are the ones that are bent out like frog legs on the outside, and the gills are behind those. And at the tail, you can see there's a nice area between the tail and the end of the body. This is called the tail base. It's not that important, except for one species has no tail base, the freckled frogfish. So that's how we identify that species. So if you see a fish that looks something like this, it's most likely a frogfish. If you go on Instagram and go to #frogfish, you're going to see a lot of leaf scorpionfish on there. A lot of people and even dive guides think that leaf scorpionfish and even waspfish, sometimes velvet fish, are frogfish. But there are some key differences that are very, very easy to see and to look for, and those are the fins on the side of the body, for one. If you look at the frogfish, they've got what look like those crooked elbows and then the fins on the bottom. But when you think of scorpionfish, they've got that really large fan-shaped fin on the side of their body. It really looks nothing like a leg like the frogfishes do. So look for those fins and you'll know right away whether it's a frogfish or maybe one of those baby devil scorpionfish that look really, really like frogfish when you first look at them. When you look at the forehead, most of the time the scorpionfish have their fins starting above the head and going all the way to the end of the body. Frogfish have their little spines in the front. And when those spines aren't out, it's just a smooth forehead. So there's a difference there when you look at the head as to the shape of the fins. One really cool thing about frogfish, and I'll probably say that phrase over and over again, is that they can change color. I've witnessed it in one dive in about 58 minutes. One of my friends in Malapascua witnessed one change color in about 10 seconds after it was disturbed by some bubbles hitting it from a careless diver. This frogfish then moved from its perch to a new sponge and changed from either white to purple or purple to white right there in about 10 seconds. So they can do it quickly if they're under some stress. They normally take about 2 weeks for a full color change, and they can change color multiple times. And the main reason they change color is to blend in with their surroundings. This frogfish right here, there's no Photoshop involved. This is the real frogfish, although these photos are 4 months apart. This frogfish lived at a dive site called Mazaplad Sur, and that's when it was purple. And then we found her at Bahura, and she was green. We don't know how long it took her to change color. We just know in those 4 months we didn't find her. This was the before, and then on the right, the green, that was the after. If you're familiar with these dive sites, you'll remember that Mazaplad Sur has tons of purple sponges, and Bahura has tons of green crinoids and green seagrass. So this frogfish was changing color because the habitat was a completely different color between the dive sites. And I say it's a she because when she lived at Mazaplad Sur, there was always a couple male suitors. And if any of you were here around 2015, you might have even seen this frogfish. The funny thing is, after she went to Bahura, she came back to Mazaplad Sur to the exact same 3 rocks where she lived for 1.5 years before she disappeared for 4 months. So giant frogfish, just as a quick aside, they move around a lot compared to most frogfish. But if you dive enough, you can pinpoint they got a couple favorite places where you're going to find them in that dive site. Unfortunately, she disappeared one day, but she was there for about 2 years with a really cool color change. And if you look at the body pattern, there's growths all over the body. That's other organisms, that's not the frogfish. So that A with wings, you can see that matches up if you take a second to look with the frogfish on the left and the frogfish on the right. And you'll also notice the rest of the patterns on the body match up. Although the patterns on the right are a bit thicker and more connected because once again, that's a living organism and therefore it's growing, it's expanding, but the overall shape is pretty much the same. They're born knowing how to change color because if you've ever been lucky enough on a blackwater dive to see a juvenile, they're completely see-through when they are around 3 to 4 millimeters. This one was about 8 millimeters, and it changed color overnight. These photos were 18 hours apart. We saw 4 brand new ones on this dive, all of them bright orange, and then the next day, the 2 that were in the sand still stayed bright orange, and then 2 of them that were next to a rope turned this maroon color. So they were trying to become the color of the rope and much darker to blend in, while the bright orange ones stayed bright orange as their little warning signal that they don't taste good. Although I'm sure they do to other predators, but they're going to trick them and give them that neon orange color, that warning color. And you'll see that box of numbers in the bottom of the screen. 1 and 3 are the colors of the body, and then 2 and 4 are the average color of one of the large spots on the body. So that's the actual color change right there, just using Photoshop and picking some different pixels out. This one changed color in 6 days. Pretty obvious why. It showed up bright yellow in an orange sponge, and then we came back a few days later and it's completely changed color. And what looks like texture on its body, the body pattern is even lessened a bit to blend in more with these orange sponges. This frogfish here is what I would say my favorite frogfish and favorite example of frogfish color change. In all the ID books, if you don't have the newest one, this is called painted frogfish. If you've got your ID books handy, take your pen out. It's around page 362. Cross that out and put clown frogfish. This is actually a baby clown frogfish, and I'll show you why. And I brought these photos to the authors of the book. They agreed with me that it's a clown frogfish, and it's been removed from the new edition until they can do some further studies on it. So this is May 28th. What I want you to look at is the blue outline on the frogfish, and also the area behind the eye and the area in front of the tail. So keep an eye on those 3 places. We came back 1 week later, and you'll notice that the blue outline is pretty much disappeared, and you'll see some white specks growing at the base of the tail and behind the eye. So we came back a week later after that, and you'll notice it's completely red now. The orange polka dots are somewhat visible in part of the body, other places not so visible. The blue outline is pretty much all gone except for behind the dorsal spine, and there's what looks like a nice white triangle coming in behind the eye. Although I didn't get to photograph it again, I had coworkers who did, and it had a complete silver triangle a week after this photo and started growing warts. So when you see these little black frogfish with orange polka dots, about 2 weeks later, they're going to look like this, and they're the same species as this frogfish, the clown frogfish, or also called warty frogfish. So believe it or not, this little guy here is exactly the same species as this one. When you see the adults, it makes a lot more sense, but these little black ones with orange polka dots, they mimic a specific kind of flatworm, which you might have seen. It's black with orange polka dots and a blue outline. As they grow older, they grow more comfortable in their environment. They don't need to mimic a flatworm anymore once they blend in with their environment better. Lucky for us, dive guides and guests, frogfish don't move much, which is wonderful. I believe the record for one in Dauin that I've seen is roughly 2 years in the same dive site, but I've heard stories across the Indo-Pacific of some frogfish staying for 3 or 4 years in generally the exact same spot. So they don't move much because they're ambush predators. The less they move, the more camouflage they become, the more effective at hunting they become. So it just makes no sense for them to move if moving decreases their ability to catch prey. And sometimes you'll see frogfish that are covered in sand. Sometimes you'll see polyps growing on them. I've seen like shrimps, skeleton shrimp, gobies crawling all over frogfish. You never know what's going to happen. But if it's that hard for us to see frogfish, it's going to be pretty hard for other animals to see them as well. So they're not lazy, they're just efficient. Like this one here, it's decided to live underneath a crinoid. I'm sure it's got tons of fish coming in for a nice little buffet, and they can't even see it. Another good example of camouflage, just hanging out there on the sponge. Why would this frogfish move anywhere when the entire area around it is dark brown sand? It's going to pick this orange sponge and it's going to stay there or other similar orange sponges for probably a pretty long time, or until it changes color and chooses somewhere else. Another good one, camouflaged. This is a hairy frogfish hanging out inside pulsating coral. And the guides told me where it was, and I still had trouble finding it just because it was so well camouflaged. And another quick aside, hairy frogfish growths mimic their surroundings. So wherever you see hairy frogfish, they're going to look different depending on their habitat near them. Like this one has some branching hair on it to mimic the polyps on the pulsating coral. This white one in this photo has almost no hair on it because it mimics the dead shell of this heart urchin. And then you'll see the brown ones with some wispy algae here in Dauin, or if you go to Lembe, they've got really thick brown mucky algae to mimic that algae. So like I said, they're ambush predators, and they're just gonna sit there until the prey comes to them. And that's when their lure comes in handy. The lure brings the prey to the frogfish doesn't have to go to them. Here are a couple different lures. On the left, you have the hairy frogfish, and on the right, you have a clown frogfish. But back to the hairy frogfish. You'll see it's in a fishing action right here in this photo set. These frogfish will pick a good spot depending on if there's lots of prey around them, good food for them to eat. And when they see something they want to eat, the first thing they do, they don't just start fishing. They have to be quick about it. When you go to a dock, when you get to a boat, you don't just chuck your bait in. You want to make sure it's on the hook right, everything's set up. You don't just go there and dump everything out. So this frogfish, to prepare, will almost invisibly move so slowly and rotate either just its mouth or its whole body towards the prey. So if you don't know what you're looking for, you might miss it completely moving. So if you see a frogfish and one fin is kind of rotating sideways, just stop, and you might see the rest of the body follow it. This is a good sign that the frogfish is probably lining up with its prey. They need to line up with their prey because they swallow their prey whole if it's not too big. And it's pretty hard to swallow prey whole if the prey is to the side of you. So they rely on a vacuum or a suction. So they need to be facing the frogfish or the prey item dead on. And then once they're facing it, and it's roughly 10 to 12 body lengths away, they will start fishing. And as they fish, the prey will come closer and closer. And when that prey is one body length away, all the frogfish has to do is open its mouth. Once the mouth is open, that fish is sucked in, or that crustacean, whatever it's eating, is sucked in and swallowed whole in 6 milliseconds. Nothing else swallows prey faster in the ocean than a frogfish. So they might be very, very slow, but they swallow prey in 6 milliseconds. They can easily swallow prey their same body length, and then with a bit of effort, they can swallow prey up to about twice their body length. And they do that by swallowing it and then curling it into a circle or bending it in half within their stomach. And if you've ever seen a good YouTube video or seen this in person, you can see it happening as the stomach expands. You see that fish or that prey item actually bending in the stomach. If the lure is bitten off, it can regrow. That's no problem. Sometimes it might regrow as the wrong shape, different shape. And I've even seen photos of a second lure branching off from the rod. So it's like a Y-shaped double lure, which is pretty crazy. So look at the lures. You never know what you might find. I've seen a couple where the frogfish had some lure damage, and the lure looked like it was trapped underneath scar tissue and then was going to be like grown over by skin. And we didn't see those frogfish very long after that. So as long as they can keep eating, they're going to stay alive. They don't always have to use their lure. It just helps them when there's no prey near them. Multiple times I've seen frogfish eat other small animals just because they came too close. So they can survive without it, but it helps to have it. And as long as they can survive while it regrows, they'll be back to normal in no time. And their diet consists of pretty much anything dumb enough to come close to their mouth. I've had frogfish attack my stick before, just by pointing them out to a guest. So they'll attack pretty much anything. One of my favorite stories, I was at the corner, Punta, Secret Corner, a lot of names for it, the octopus dive site here in Dauin. And I saw a little clown frogfish, maybe about 2 inches, with all the garden eels. And if you've been to that dive site, you know there's thousands and thousands of garden eels. And as we got closer, the garden eels all retreated in their holes, and this little frogfish started its little body rotation that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And I thought to myself, this isn't going to happen. It can't be that stupid. And it was. As soon as that garden eel next to it got its head just at the top of the hole, this little frogfish attacked it and tried to eat the head of this 2-meter-long garden eel. Obviously, it was unsuccessful, but they will just eat whatever's near them. So the best way to answer the question of what do they eat would be they're going to eat the most common prey item where they live. Then you got to break it up by species. So I'll just give you a couple examples. Hairy frogfish, they live in sand, algae areas. They're going to eat things like flounder. They're going to eat mantis shrimp, waspfish, small cuttlefish, things that are living in the algae. Compared to giant frogfish that live on artificial wrecks, they live in reefs. They're going to eat things like cardinal fish, soldier fish, even puffer fish. I've had friends see them, which didn't turn out so well. And then you've got clown frogfish that live in rubble. A lot of times they're going to eat a lot more crustaceans than other species. So they eat pretty much anything. They have a couple of main predators. One is other frogfish. Frogfish have been known to eat each other when they get too close. I've seen one attack another one, but never successfully eat it. Although I've heard another guest scream underwater when they saw one eat another one. So luckily I didn't witness that. Other predators are going to be triggerfish, moray eels, lizardfish, and then flounders will act as vacuums and suck up the babies from the sand when they swim by. I've not seen it happen, but I found a frogfish and then come back minutes later and it's completely gone with no other divers or boats on the dive site with a flounder trailing us. So I've never seen it, but other people have witnessed it. To be honest, any ambush predator is going to attack a frogfish who's in the wrong place at the wrong time. I have a friend who's seen a mantis shrimp spear one, and I've had dive guides who've seen anemones digesting them. So really, they eat pretty much everything, and then ambush predators are going to be ones that are going to eat them, but really it's just wrong place, wrong time. This is another view of the clown frogfish lure, and this one is modified to mimic a shrimp. And you can see it's got some legs on the left, a little head on top, and the body going to the right. And this species will actually take this lure and fling it back and forth over the sand, looking like a little prancing shrimp. This lure itself is bigger than some frogfish I've photographed. It was probably about 1 centimeter long, so it's pretty large, but lots of detail. As I said, they can eat things up to twice their body length, but it's not always successful. I got an email from a friend one day, and he was at Apple Islands, and then he sent me this photo. And it was a regular black giant frogfish there that had attacked this fish from behind. It got lodged in its throat, and as I mentioned earlier, they breathe by having water flow through their mouth and then out their gills in essentially their armpit. So this frogfish attacked this other fish and it got stuck in its throat and then stopped all water movement. It couldn't breathe and it died right there on the reef. They don't like to move, but they can move if they need to. This one's in the act of swimming. It was on a mooring block in some surge and didn't like the rope moving back and forth. So it was going to a new spot. Sometimes frogfish seem like they want to be friends. I've been approached and landed on by frogfish many, many times, although it doesn't happen often. This frogfish lived at Ginamaan about 4 years ago. It might still be there, I'm not sure, and it loved divers in black wetsuits. So this is me photographing one of the guests with this frogfish desperately trying to land on this person's leg. Here's a juvenile black giant frogfish landing on my camera, and luckily my guest took both photos of me, one from my view, one from in front of my camera. This frogfish jumped off the wreck at Thalata and just landed on my camera and hung out. If this ever happens to you or a frogfish tries to land on you, the best thing to do is do nothing. Become the environment, try to stay neutrally buoyant or fin pivot, let it land on you. I've seen guests and other divers swim away and the frogfish just follows them. You don't want to hit it with your fin, you don't want to hurt it, just let it land on you. In my experience, after about 30 seconds, it realizes that you move around, you're loud, you're obnoxious, it doesn't want to be there anymore. In the off chance it won't leave, your guide will either take the back of their hand or take your camera and just move it to where it came from and it will jump right off. No need to touch it at all, which is pretty nice. So like I said, if it comes to land on you, let it happen. It's a great experience. You're not touching it. You're not breaking any rules. And honestly, it's the safest way to react to that happening. This happened about 3 meters away on a different dive. This little frogfish jumped off the wreck and landed on my hands and just sat there on my thumb. I almost cried. I might have cried, I'm not sure. But I moved my camera back and it jumped off about 20, 30 seconds later. So like I said, let them land on you. It's awesome and it's the safest way to react to that happening. They can swim and they can walk as their main methods of movement. And then the psychedelic frogfish likes to bounce. It will curl its tail in and then bounce down along the seafloor. When they swim, they have two different methods. One method is what I call blimp propulsion. They suck in the water and then expel it from their gills, like in this photo, and they pretty much putt, putt, putt right through the water at an extremely slow pace. The other way they swim is simply by using their tail. And a lot of times giant frogfish use this method because their tails are so large, they can get enough propulsion to get things going. Some juvenile frogfish use tail movement and jet propulsion or blimp propulsion at the same time, and they can get some pretty slow speeds going. When they're walking, they have two walking methods. They either alternate with their pectoral fins, right and then left, and ignore their pelvic fins, or they do two pelvic fins at a time, two pectoral, and alternate by pair. So if you look closely, you can see either two fins are moving or four fins are moving in sets of two. This frogfish lived here in Dauin a few years ago and was chasing me away from its female mate. So sometimes they'll move to chase a potential suitor away. Now, I'm not attractive to frogfish, but I had a yellow clown frogfish octopus holder, a little bit bigger than the female. And I believe this frogfish was getting aggressive towards that. And so I backed off. But you can see it's not very happy with me. And after movement comes reproduction. A lot of times frogfish will move to go find a mate or after they've mated. And there's actually things to look for when they're mating to figure out what's going on. And the first thing is there's going to be two frogfish together. That's a pretty good sign that they're a couple or will be a couple. And distance will tell you. If they're touching each other, they're a couple. If there's some small separation, the male is just working up the courage to ask her out, to put it in the simplest terms. So males need to flirt and show off. In this photo, the black one is the male on the right and the brown one on the left is the female. So the black one is doing three different things. The first thing is the fin is going up, the dorsal spines, dorsal fin is spread out, and the fins on the side are out, tail spread out. It's made itself as big as possible. It's posturing. Second thing they do is they chatter their teeth open and closed very, very, very fast. And third, they start shaking their body, having little mini seizures, like a cell phone vibrating back and forth. And they start doing all these things back and forth, mixing them, matching them at a nice distance from the female, because remember, she can eat him pretty easily. Normally males are smaller, but sometimes they can be almost the same size. So two things will happen. Either the female will try to eat him, or she will accept him as a mate. With this pair, the female tried to eat him, but she missed, and he was able to live another day. In the case of the female accepting him, I call this holding hands. The male will put one fin on the side of the female and just touch the side of her body, and that's his way of saying, I'm ready to mate. That's her way of saying, I won't eat you yet. So it's pretty much, she tolerates him, and he's like, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready. Back to this one just for a second. You can see the brown frogfish is quite a bit bigger than the white frogfish. And that's because she's got a lot of eggs in there. And when she released her eggs and we came back a couple days later, they were pretty much the exact same size. So just to show you, they get filled up with a lot of eggs. On the left are two freckled frogfish. You can see that the male has just decided to sit on the female because he's like, I'm lazy, she's mine, no other frogfish around. On the right, you can see the pink male with his fin stretched out just behind the eye, I think, of the white frogfish, the female, making constant contact with her. And then we've got a third wheel going on here. We have the female in the middle and then the two males, one on each side. They live together for a while, and then the black one would guard the female from the small pink one. When they would be ready to mate, the pink one would be there and fight for about a day. And then after they would mate, would come back the next day, the small pink one would be hiding and the black one with the female. And this would repeat every about 3 to 4 weeks because they mate almost every full moon. Normally around that time, full moon is a good signal to animals. It also means they've got the biggest and strongest tides. So the best way to spread out your eggs is send it out at full moon. You got the fastest tides going out there for you. And this little pink one knew he was too small to fight the black one, so he would only show up when she was ready to mate. Otherwise, she'd get chased away. So good strategy by him. We never saw them mate, so we're not sure what happened. But we do know that frogfish can mate with many, many males together at one time. There's a video from Blue Heron Bridge in Florida with, I believe, 3 different males, 3 or 4 fertilizing one female's eggs. So that is possible. Just like people, sometimes they can have the wrong partner. In this slide, we have a painted frogfish and we have a giant frogfish in the background. This was during a course, and the red frogfish was flirting and putting out all these signals towards this giant frogfish. And if you look between the G and the P, between wrong and partner, you'll see the mouth of the giant frogfish. We never saw the red frogfish again, but the black one was still around. So we believe that she ate the red one. To get the mating process going, the male needs to get the female off of the bottom because she is too heavy with eggs to actually swim herself to the water column to release her egg. So the male will get down there and do all the work and push her off of the bottom. You can see the red one is the male, yellow is the female. On the left, he's almost doing a push-up, pushing her off the ground with his fins below him. That didn't work, so he went to the other side of the frogfish, went on his back, braced on the sponge, and then pushed her off the sponge that way. Eventually, he got to her, got her up off the bottom, nose underneath, pushed her up off the bottom. She spins around and releases her eggs while he spins around and fertilizes them. I've seen this once with these two frogfish, and it's the funniest thing you've pretty much seen in your life. The female is spinning like crazy, releasing this long ribbon of eggs. The male spinning, fertilizing all of them. And what you get in the end is this beautiful egg ribbon. It starts out as a long ribbon, but it curls back up into the shape of the ovaries of the female. So that little ribbon is about two inches, I would say, and it's got probably tens of thousands of eggs in there. And these eggs will hatch a day or two later and then float as plankton in the ocean for about 1 to 2 months, then dropping onto the bottom when they're around 4 or 5 millimeters. People really aren't so sure exactly how big they are when they drop down, but we know from blackwater diving and one of my friend's experiments here, a guy named Martin de Brouwer, did a little project about size of fish larvae when they settle, and they were finding frogfish in the experiment that were still see-through around 5 millimeters. 5-6 millimeters. So as divers, we almost never see them until they're about 7 or 8 millimeters, because when they're smaller, they're hiding in the sand grains. So you almost can't find them because they're literally in the grains of sand. I used to bring a coin around with me on every dive to photograph frogfish. A lot of you might have seen this photo before somewhere. This was from 2014, maybe 2015, somewhere around then. And I did this for size reference, but I noticed about a year later, after I got an award in an international photo competition with this photo, that people started copying it. And I don't mind being copied. It's flattery. I've copied other people. That's how I got this idea. But you'll notice people are getting really aggressive and having really bad behavior, trying to mimic what I believe started with this shot. So unfortunately, I don't take this shot anymore, but it's a really, really good tool to show you size reference of a lot of these babies we have here in Dauin. I now use a ruler. It's super scientific. Doesn't look good on Instagram or Facebook. It's literally just for the science of it. And that's an 8mm frogfish. And if you look closely above the eye, you can see the white lure there in all its glory, little light white tuft ready to go. I've seen frogfish fishing as small as 7-8mm. So they can use that as soon as they're there on the ground. This one is the smallest one I've ever seen. It was just under 7mm. I measured it. And you'll notice that the tail is see-through, the dorsal fin is see-through. And that's because it's so young, it hasn't fully pigmented to full orange yet. The tail is still see-through. So if you go on Instagram and you see people saying they found 4 or 5mm frogfish, they didn't. Those are all about 8-9mm. Anything under 8 or 7mm is going to have a nice see-through tail like this really, really small frogfish here. This is a lot of people's favorite juvenile, the clown frogfish. Really, really cool pattern there. And then, like I said, the other clown frogfish with all these orange polka dots is also almost exclusively a juvenile pattern. And if you're lucky, you'll see some of the few species that actually brood their own eggs. This is actually a photo from my friend Ben. He used to work on the Aggressor. He works on the Aggressor now, sorry. He used to work at Atlantis. Worked on the liveaboard there. So some of you guys might have met Ben, dove with him, funny American guy. He gave me this photo for my presentation taken in Malapascua. And these are marblemouth frogfish babies. A few species like marblemouth frogfish, cryptic, and psychedelic frogfish will actually capture their eggs and stick them on the side of their body until they hatch. And this means there's going to be less of them, but they're going to be bigger. And this also means that they're not going to be able to move around as much because they don't have their pelagic phase. They're just born right there next to the parent. So that's one reason why these rare species don't spread out. That's why marblemouth are all over Malapascua and nowhere else, psychedelic and ambon and nowhere else. They can't just ride the currents and send their eggs to another location. So where can we find frogfish in the world? You can find them anywhere there's warm water except for the Mediterranean. But there's a few special places to look. Obviously, Dauin is #1, but in case you can't make it here and you want to go somewhere closer, you can find lots of frogfish where I'm from in Florida, a couple hours south of Orlando at Blue Heron Bridge in Riviera Beach. Also in Clearwater, Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico, about an hour and a half west of Orlando. They have these large frogfish, about 25-30 centimeters, called ocellated frogfish. Not the same as the ones here in Dauin. They live on the limestone ledges, eating bait fish that are chased in by larger predator fish. Then at Blue Heron Bridge, they've got a lot of hairy frogfish. And then they also have some other species like long lure frogfish and dwarf frogfish and sargassum fish. So that's me last Thanksgiving. I found this hairy frogfish in about 1.5 meters of water. So a lot of frogfish there at Blue Heron Bridge if you know where to look. Most of them can be seen while snorkeling. You can actually find frogfish in Africa. I've never been diving in Africa, so I borrowed these from Google, but we've got the Senegalese frogfish and the leopard frogfish. So that's just some cool species. Australia has a lot of endemic species. They've got one called the red-fingered angler. This is the newest official frogfish species, not the redescribed one a few years ago, and it's found pretty much at only a few dive sites, I believe, in Sydney. And it's very, very well camouflaged. And then, of course, Asia Indo-Pacific is where you want to go if you want to see the most frogfish. And Philippines, Indonesia are your best places to go. I see frogfish everywhere I go. I found that giant red one at the top right in Tabataha, so you even have a chance of seeing one on liveaboard there. But really, without lying, without embellishing, I honestly believe that Dauin is the best place in the world for frogfish. Although we don't have the psychedelic, we don't have we have almost as many species of lembe, just not quite, but we have more numbers. If you come here in peak season around April, May, June for frogfish, you might see 20 or 30 in 1 hour. My record is 28 in 1 hour. I know someone who saw over 40 2 years ago. I found 16, 17 shore diving with a friend, no guides. So I don't know of anywhere else with those numbers. And on bad days, sometimes we see 10, 15, 20 for the morning. Out of season, we still have frogfish year round. But in those April, May, June months, if you do 4 or 5 dives a day, you're not going to get sick of frogfish, but you're going to have a very, very full memory card. Although there's frogfish found all over the world, there's roughly 50, 52 species. Only one of those species is found everywhere and in warm water, and that is the sargassum fish. They have a swim bladder unique to them among frogfish species, so they just follow the currents and go wherever it takes them. So they're travelers, they're nomads. They have been found as far north as Norway and Rhode Island. And I've been swimming in Rhode Island. It's extremely cold. So they do make it there naturally with no human interference, but they don't survive. It's way too cold for them there. So here's one on the left, just swimming on a night dive. And on the right is one that I was lucky enough to find at the end of a dive at Apple Island. It was in a big clump of sargassum just hanging out. So sargassum is those large brown mats of seaweed you see floating around. And now just a bit of ID. There's 12 main species of frogfish in the Visayas. So that's the central Philippines. So basically here, Cebu and Malapascua. But these species are found throughout the Indo-Pacific. So you can actually use this little poster for almost anywhere out here when you're diving. But I want to focus on Dauin exclusively because that's the #1 place you want to go. And these are the 9 main species. We'll go over them quickly, give you guys time for some questions. On the left, top left, is painted frogfish. They grow to about 15, 20 centimeters, and they have 3 polka dots on their tail. That's the best way to ID them. Don't look at what they say in the ID books. It's confusing and sometimes is not correct. A lot of people use their lures, but the lures get bitten off, they grow the wrong shape, so I don't use that. I use other things. Look for the tail. These 3 polka dots are going to be there if it's painted frogfish. Sometimes there's like 30 polka dots, but there's 3 key ones you're always going to find, and they don't have the saddle of the clown frogfish on top right. They don't have the warts, they don't have hair. And they're the most common frogfish you're going to find. Whenever you find a little tiny orange or tiny red one, that's a painted frogfish. Giant frogfish are up to about 35, 40 centimeters, and they have 2 larger circles on their tail closer to the ends. They've got some lines radiating from their eye, and their body pattern is not circles, but it's more of amoebas or squiggles. If you look at that yellow frogfish, you can look closely. It's not polka dots. It's actually little lines in there in the body pattern. On the top right, we've got the clown frogfish, also called warty frogfish. They have that clown face paint on their body. It's not face paint, I just call it that. It's really a body pattern. And as they get about 5, 6 centimeters, 2, 3 inches, they grow warts on their body. And a lot of you might have seen this species in the middle of nowhere and thought that's not blended in at all. I mean, there's no camouflage. And that's because this species uses disruptive camouflage. And what that means is they don't blend in with their surroundings. They disrupt their own body pattern to become a surrounding. So if you look at this yellow frogfish, it's got those red body patterns. Imagine them as an extension of that maroonish sponge behind the word clown. To other animals, this is a red purple sponge with a bunch of other yellow sponges attached to it. So you might see these frogfish out in the open, but they are really blending in by hiding their true identity. Meanwhile, the other species blend in by just becoming the background. And these guys also grow to about 10, 15 centimeters. We've got hairy frogfish. They're normally covered in hair, also about 15 centimeters long. But sometimes, like the white ones, they don't have hair. They have peach fuzz. It all depends on their surroundings. This species has a worm-shaped lure. Other species don't have that, and they're also a bit chunkier. And they're going to be living out in the open a lot more. So they're pretty easy to identify because of the hair, the body shape, and that worm lure on their body. Some have stripes, some have splotches, and there's scientists trying to figure out if those are different species or not. But right now we consider them all just hairy frogfish. Then in the middle we got freckled frogfish. These, I would say, grow about 10 centimeters, and they have no tail base. So look at the body and the tail, and it's a much normal fish shape compared to other frogfish. There's not that gap in between, so there's no tail base. They like to live on sponges in the shadow of other things, like inside tires, inside structures. You rarely ever find freckled frogfish like this out in the open. Then we have spot fin frogfish. You'll rarely ever see this one because they like to live, especially in Dauin, in very shallow water, like 2 to 3 meters deep, in those rocks where you're putting on your fins. They live under those rocks. No one's ever looking there. But if you do a night dive, on the way back in, look in all those rocks in the very shallow water after the grass ends, and you might see one out hunting. And they look like they look like freckled frogfish, but they do have a tail base, and their body is not as smooth. You see, the freckled frogfish is very smooth shaped. The spot fin frogfish is more of a rough shape on the top of the body. And this one grows around 7 centimeters. This is our friend Randall's frogfish, named after, I think his name is Jack Randall. I believe he passed away last week. He's a very, very famous scientist. A lot of animals named after him, and he got a frogfish here. This one only grows about 4 or 5 centimeters, and they mimic Halimeda algae. So that's how small they are. They mimic little leaves of algae. I believe they're nocturnal because you rarely ever see them out in the open except for night dives, and then you see it sometimes in groups. So I believe they're nocturnal, but that's just from personal observation. You can identify them by their 2 white spots on their tail, their paper-thin body shape, and if you look above the eye, they really don't have that little dorsal spine. It's fused to the larger one. So they don't have that horn in the front the other species have. But they're paper thin, very, very small. This is the band fin frogfish. It lives in the same habitat as the spot fin, which is very shallow water underneath rocks. I believe also this one is nocturnal as well. In Dauin, they've been found deeper and occasionally in the daytime, but generally you find them at nighttime or underneath these very, very shallow rocks. They have a fused dorsal spine, so it doesn't move like the other species. It's just this cone stuck on their head, and they have a rod with no lure. And they're very small as well, about 4 or 5 centimeters. And then last but not least, we have the ocellated frogfish. Same common name as the one in the Gulf of Mexico, but different species. This one is also around 5 centimeters maximum size. It's got that beautiful unicorn horn in the front. It's got that beautiful pattern that ocellates on the dorsal spine. Most of the time they're black with an orange circle, but they come in almost every color. I love this species because I was contacted by the world's leading frogfish scientist, and he got me in his published paper with some photos and with some quotes, and he was able to get me this photo, a photo of this species on the cover of the Copeia Scientific Journal about 2 years ago. So that was a dream come true for me, getting a frogfish on a scientific journal cover. It was called the Lembe frogfish. I dispute that because we have way more of this species here in Dauin than in Lembe. You might have seen them at San Miguel. They're very common there around April, May, June at San Miguel. You find them all over that dive site. So that's a bit about frogfish. I just want to give you a couple tips at the end, and I've seen there's some questions on there. I got answers to them, so don't worry. Just a couple tips. For one, please don't ever move a frogfish for a photo. I do talks about frogfish, but I also do talks about ethical photography and effects of social media on photography. So my rule is I don't touch my frogfish. I photograph them where I find them. Now, this means that many times you're not going to have a good position or think you're going to get a good photo. So one thing I like to do is just photograph the face or part of the body. It doesn't matter where it is, what it's on, as long as you can get some water backgrounds, just zoom in or get close and just photograph from that first spine to the mouth, and you can really make it work. Or if your photo you think is not so good, crop it, darken the background, and you get these nice little menacing portraits, look like they're staring right at you. So the one on the right was just on a pink sponge, normal frogfish, body hidden, just the face. Nice, easy little thing to do, and you get some really cool photos, some good portraits. Two more examples of ones that are clearly hiding. The one on the left, I believe, is under a pier, and the one on the right is completely hidden by sponges and in current. I couldn't go to the other side. So I zoomed out a bit more, but once again, just the face. That's all you need. You don't need a fancy portrait. You don't need the whole body. Just get that face in there. Nothing else matters. You got a good photo. One of my personal favorites, if you have manual capabilities, is put it on a really low f-stop. This one's at f2.8. Better to try 4 or 5 first to get the hang of it. And what this does is it blurs the backgrounds. This is a frogfish in sand. Boring, boring background. I blurred it out. Now you don't know where it is. Makes it really, really bright and vivid. And the focus is only on the face of the frogfish. And you can even see texture on the body. So if you can blur the background or put it in like super macro mode where it does that automatically, that is a really good alternative to moving it or thinking you can't get a good photo with it where it is. Another baby in the sand. Once again, blurry, blurry backgrounds, blur out the sand grains, just get that peach fuzz going. And that's also a really, really good technique for hairy frogfish. I'm sure if you photographed them before, you photograph the face and it just looks like a mess. There's too much hair. Dial that f-stop down, make it blurry, and then all that hair gets blurred out and you're just left with the face and like a little bit of goatee going on. Here's a good example. Adult hairy frogfish on f2.8. You don't see the rest of the body. You only focus on the eyes and the goatee and the lure. So very small amount in focus. If you have a compact like a TG5, you can achieve something like this by going to macro mode. Go to that flower icon or super macro, and it should use the settings on the camera to make it a bit more blurry for you automatically. You can use a snoot. Of course, not everyone has a snoot or wants to deal with a snoot, but here's a good example of isolating it from a bad background and just snooting it. You isolate everything, you just have the frogfish right there in the camera. A good example, here's my psychedelic frogfish from Ambon. You've got one here, so I snooted it, and I did cry on this dive. I got this photo, not much Photoshop going on. So if you have a snoot, you can get things like this. This wasn't tons of skill. This was just good buoyancy and patience. I took about 30 photos and the frogfish didn't move. So blur the background, just focus on a body part. Another good thing you can do is photograph the lure if it's out, like it's fishing. I've got some photos like that where you just have the eye, the mouth, and the lure with a nice water background. But honestly, there's no right way to take a photo. Social media is so saturated with frogfish photos that almost everything's been done. So don't care if your photo's not as good as someone else or someone's done it before. Take photos that make you happy. You know, it doesn't matter. I take photos of qualities like this, these photos, because I live here. I've dived every day for the past 5-6 years here. So just be creative. Try to think of things you can do, but as a start, just focus on the face if nothing else is going on. Get that background blurry. Or if you've got a snoot, to get a photo like this, or if you go on Google, you can make your own snoot for a few dollars with some pretty good results going on. And if you want to know more, I did an article for Dive Photo Guide a couple years ago. Just go into Google, type in divephotoguide.com, Daniel Frogfish, and you should get a tips to photograph frogfish article that'll have some more photo examples and some more information about what you should do there. So that's it for me. Thank you guys for listening. I'm sure I'll be getting fed some questions now, but if you want to follow me, I'm pretty much only on Instagram. and I'm under the name Dr. Frogfish, Dr. Frogfish. So thank you very much, guys.
Well, hello. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Hello.
I see the video is still a bit not coming in. Hold on, let's just have a look here. So, hi, my name is Ronnie. I work for Atlantis Dive Resorts, who have been hosting this presentation. We would like to get everybody's microphone on mute, please. And then all the questions that you guys put in the Q&A, I will ask Daniel. So, right, there we go. You can see me. Good. No, we can see. Oh, hello. That's not me. Sorry. So if you can just turn your cameras off, please, and then turn your, Daniel, can you reshare your screen, please? So just we'll get that logo of yours, and then we can have a look. Super, excellentissimo. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful presentation by Daniel. We look forward to seeing you at Atlantis. Atlantis Dive Resorts operates 2 land-based resorts and 1 liveaboard. We do have, hold on, I'm just gonna, 1 second, I'm just going to have a look at the participants here so we can, someone's got their video on. There we go. Super. So for some reason, it is not working on my video, so I'm just going to mute that. So I wanted to touch base and just let you know, we guys have 2 dive resorts, one in Puerto Galera in the northern part of the Philippines. The other one is, of course, in the frogfish capital of the world, as Daniel defined it, which is Dauin on Negros Oriental. Daniel lives in Dauin, and he is a freelance instructor. He wrote, as you know, the Frogfish Specialty, and that specialty is offered at Atlantis by Daniel. So if you are coming to Dauin, we will be delighted to know, and you can write our reservations department ahead of time, what it is that you want to do with frogfish. And if you want to do the frogfish specialty, then wicked, we can definitely do that, and we're happy, and Daniel will be happy as well. So what I'll do is I want to just tell you in 2 sentences what makes Atlantis different and a lot of other dive resorts. We are a dive resort. We are a resort for divers. We dive 5 guided boat dives per day. That is 4 day dives and 1 night dives. We use small speedboats, and we return back to the resort after each dive. We have dedicated camera rooms in each resort, so that helps you when you're trying to take photos of this wonderful 7 species of frogfish that are common to Dauin. So you can come back and have a look at whatever it is that you were looking at or taking a shot of, and make sure that you got the right shot that you're looking for. Or then you just go and rob Daniel for his photos. That will be much better. And so between the 2 dive resorts, we offer 5 guided boat dives per day, and on the boat on Atlantis Azores, we also offer 4 to 5 dives per day. So heavy on the dive side, we all have local guides. All of our guides are local, people that have been diving up and down the beach, both in Puerto Galera and in Dumaguete for years. Our oldest dive guide, I think, is well over 50. And it is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful way to get the local guys spotting all these different things, which is a wonderful opportunity for you guys also to get to know a lot of these guys, and to come with your wish list to Atlantis and tell them, oh, well, I want to see this, I want to see this, I want to see this, and off they go and searching for these things. So we'll move now to the questions and answers. I will also put in the chat our general email address for inquiries, and also my personal address and Brent Durant personal address, so you can contact us with any questions about Atlantis dive vacations. So without further ado, I'll go into the questions. We do have a lot of, so I'm going to read them by order. Okay, so don't be offended if I haven't gotten to yours. That's because you probably are a bit further down. So the first question was from John. Dauin is a nursery for frogfish. How far will they or can they walk, swim from there? How far can a frogfish move?
All right. So generally the frogfish don't move very far. The farthest I've witnessed a frogfish move in one dive, I saw one go maybe, if you've been to Ginswan out there in Zamboanguita, it went the whole dive site in the current following us. So that was a unique situation. Other ones I've seen walking maybe 20, 30 meters. And then other ones we'll find, like at Apple Island, the giants will switch dive sites, sometimes going from Rock East to Rock West, or Rock West to Katipunan. So the smaller frogfish, smaller species will generally restrict their movement within one part of one dive site, or different structures in one dive site. And the giants will then move around in multiple dive sites, but not go much farther away than that. So the one that moved from Mazaplat Sur to Bokura, maybe it moved 50 meters, something like that. And that's the longest I've witnessed one move.
Okay, and then we do have a comment from John on his question. He said, I got it that the eggs float. I thought you meant that it was a nursery for like everywhere.
So nursery, the term I mean for nursery is, it's just where babies show up. Nothing about incubating or anything. Just this is where babies flourish and show up. And I know there's a question on there about the babies. Just to clarify, once they mate and the eggs are released, those eggs then float for 1 to 2 months. So the eggs that come to Dauin don't originate from Dauin. We don't know where they come from. I used to believe that our frogfish came from Lembe, but someone told me the currents go the other direction. So I'm stumped now. So we are a landing spot for a bunch of eggs from somewhere else. And that's why I call it nursery.
All right, super, thanks for that. Same from John. I think you have answered that, but are there frogfish predators, and does anything eat them? I think we did touch upon that during the presentation.
Yep.
And then still from John, I often dive in Moalboal. Is there any particular reason there are so many large irregular frogfish at Pescador, or more so than along the wall?
So generally, you're going to find a lot bigger frogfish in these reef areas. If you go to the muck diving areas, there's not enough places for these big ones to hide. Here in Dauin, we find big giants pretty much at all the sites with artificial stuff on them, because it's big enough for them to hide. So just from opinion observation, I think Molbol, I've never been there diving yet. I hope to go there soon. But I believe these big frogfish chose this reef because there must be a good food source there. Maybe the sardines can come close enough where they can eat them, or maybe the fish life is very healthy there. But generally, you're gonna find a lot of these large frogfish in these reefs. Maybe our eggs go to Molbol. And maybe that's why you guys have a lot of giant frogfish there. The unfortunate thing about frogfish is they're not sexy to science. So there's not much money going into studying them. So no one has studied like where the eggs go, where they come from, why they like certain areas. My best guess could just be it's a healthy area for them, lots of fish, and I'm assuming lots of big sponges for them to hang out on. Here at Apo, we have lots of big giant frogfish. It's these small little areas with these big reefs. They're just a really good spot for giants. I couldn't quote you anything from a scientific textbook or anything to back that up. I just think it must be a healthy place for them.
So I think what I'm hearing from you is that it's basically where you've got big and healthy sponges. Is that where you'll find them?
Big sponges with fish to eat.
Yep.
If that's Molbol, then my answer's right. If it's not, then I got to go dive there and get a new answer.
Well, there's Moalboal, that's the wall, and then you've got Pescador Island in front of it, and they're very different topography. So I think maybe.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, the wall, you're a giant frogfish is going to have not a good time on a wall.
Yep.
A lot of currents. They're going to want a more reef area than a wall.
Okay, that probably explains it. And then both Karen and John asked a similar question: is flashing them too often camera flash? Is that stressful? Is that okay? Is that a problem?
The good old camera flash question. I knew someone would ask this, but that's good. So I don't think there's a black and white answer to this question because every animal is different, right? Flashing a turtle is different than flashing a pygmy seahorse. So my friend Martin de Brouwer, you might have read an article about it or a paper. He did a study flashing frogfish, flashing seahorses, and in his study, he found that really they didn't have too much reaction to the flash, and they had a significantly greater reaction to the photographer being there or touching the frogfish. So for me, I just would say, set your own limit. My limits are very low because I live here and I can dive here whenever I want compared to someone who dives 1 week a year. So I believe if you sit there for an hour and flash them over and over again, it's probably not good. Does it harm them? I couldn't tell you. So what I would recommend is just a good practice is give yourself a limit of the number of photos you're going to take of an animal and try not to break that limit. I like to limit between 5 and 10 per animal. Before I used to take 50, 60, 70. Obviously that's a really, really big number. So I think that yes, to a point, it can get pretty stressful for them, especially when you're at a place where people are diving 12 hours a day, photographing the same frogfish. So just give yourself your own limit and just don't take photos if you don't need to. Take practice shots on a similar colored sized object before you get to that frogfish. Just do things like that. Just decrease your input, your effects, because honestly, my friend's study showed that touching is way, way worse for them than the flashes, and they didn't really react to it. So don't quote me on it, but just police yourselves and just be respectful with your diving. And I think if you limit your photos, some of these frogfish have stayed here for a year and a half, people photographing them all day, every day. So I really don't think they are too affected by it since they do live in relatively shallow water.
All right, thank you. That was a good comprehensive answer. And then a question from Karen. Do they mate with the same mate? More than one in the same cycle? And how frequently? So
if you were here this year and went to Thalata, you might have seen an answer to this question happening. So they will mate with the same mate if it's the strongest mate, the best mate. Like the story of the two males and the female. Really, the males will fight each other over the female. They pretty much do the work. She might eat them if they're too small, but generally, if there's tons of males, whichever one wins will mate with her. So they're not monogamous. They're not going to just choose one and say, I love you forever. But if that's the only one around, they might mate together. The one I showed you from Allure that was very, very old, the big giant frogfish, that one has a mate and they're together, but there's no other frogfish in the island, basically. So they're together for a while. But really, they're going to go and the males are going to fight it out, and the best male is going to get that female. We generally will see a male guard a female throughout the mating season. So in a sense, a male will choose one female, but it's not always guaranteed that he will be the only one mating with her or be able to mate with her. Sometimes 2, 3, 4 will mate with the female. Sometimes just the one. So the males will choose one female, but the female, she just takes, I guess, what comes to her, and winner takes all of those guys. And they mate roughly every month with the eggs released around full moon. And this goes on for, once again, hasn't been studied really that much, but here in Dauin, they will mate from around March till around July or August. So maybe 4, 5, 6 months. And just an add-on to that, I think there's a question about age on there. No one has studied how old they live. But what I can tell you from experience is giant frogfish live at least 5 years. I believe that painted clown hairy frogfish live 1 year or less. And I believe that the really small ones like Randall's ocellated only live around 6, 7 months. So there is really no set age. It depends on the species, but they're going to be, once again, don't quote me on this. It's just from experience diving it and my best guess. It hasn't been studied. I think aside from giant, they're going to be sexually mature maybe when they're like 25% through their lifespan, something like that.
All right, thank you for that. And then a subsequent question from Karen, do different species mate? And if so, what's the offspring? Is it a hybrid?
So I have seen frogfish that I think could have been hybrid, but they were the black with orange polka dot variation. So that's still a big question mark. I have seen different species together with a pregnant or a gravid female. So gravid meaning full of unfertilized eggs. I've seen the female with her eggs and then the male of a different species, but I've never seen two different species mate, and no one's ever caught it on film. I think if two species could mate, it would be clown and painted, but to this point, no one's ever seen it. And like that photo I showed in the presentation, that red painted frogfish was flirting like crazy with the black giant frogfish. So it clearly thought it was a viable mate, but I'm pretty sure it was eaten. So that's a question that we don't have an answer to yet.
Okay, interesting. It's amazing to me that it hasn't been, I didn't realize that it really hasn't been studied that much. And so the wealth of knowledge and 6 years of diving experience that you have is incredible.
Just to add on to that, the ocellated frogfish was redescribed a couple years ago, and it's been identified for over 100 years in the old science textbooks, ID books, but they thought it only lived 100 meters deep. And so it showed up in ID books on social media. Scientists got wind of it, and that's why it was redescribed correctly with DNA testing because of divers here in the Philippines, Indonesia. So photograph everything. You never know what you might discover when you're diving.
And then send it all to you.
Yeah, please send it to me first, please.
There you go. A question from John. I don't know if you remember, but he's asking could you repeat the name of the stuff that grows on one of the frogfish?
So I forget what word I used, but it was a general term. I think I used organisms. So I'll just clarify that a bit more. Different stuff can grow on them. In that photo, it was some kind of encrusting algae. It could be coralline algae, encrusting algae. I didn't really pay attention to my inverts in college. I'm not really good at IDing things that grow on rocks and stuff. So I couldn't tell you exactly which one is on that frogfish, but it's some kind of encrusting algae. I've also seen polyps, like little baby jellyfish that have, or coral that have attached to these frogfish and are actually pulsating, open and closed. I've seen like gobies on them, but I think the stuff on that photo was either encrusting algae or coralline algae.
Interesting. And I'm just reading through the rest of the questions. Lots of thank yous, lots of super interesting. Thank you so much for the photos. Thank you for the presentation. And then John's got a last question. Do you think a male would swallow another male just to get rid of the problem?
That's an awesome question. No one has ever asked me that before, and I've been teaching this course for about 4 or 5 years. I do believe it would. I've seen 2 juveniles, one hunted the other one and tried to eat it with no female involved. And then in the photo I showed you of the 2 males and the 1 female, that black one got very, very aggressive to the other one. So I would say that I think yes, that that could happen, but how would that impact how it could mate with such a full belly? That's once again questions we don't know the answer to. But I think if it was desperate and it was the good size difference, I think it would go for it. Yes.
Interesting. I think that sums all the questions. John said, fair enough. So yeah, it looks like if someone's got any other questions, then please write them now. We are so happy to have you. Daniel, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It's actually, I have to say, it's the second time I've seen this presentation. The first time was about 3 years ago in Hong Kong, and I sat completely mesmerized by the information. I think I live in Dauin, and we see a lot of frogfish snorkeling as well. So yes, I know we're all coming on a dive vacation, but just in front of my house, which is one of the best dive sites in Dauin, but unfortunately we can't dive there anymore, and that's the pier. We have a really nice sandy patch, similar to San Miguel, which is a dive site about maybe 30 seconds away from Atlantis. And during April, May, and June, we've spotted 29 different juveniles on a snorkeling spree. So it's grab your snorkel, you know, like Daniel said, there's a bunch of them hiding in 2-3 meters, and it was phenomenal to see that. So I think you also snorkel quite a lot, Daniel, do you?
I went out there today to try to find the ones at Mazaplat Sur. I had like 7 turtles, but no frogfish during lockdown yet. They're evading me. But my friends are finding them down at cars in that area in Dauin, sneaking past the police and getting in the water.
Yeah, well, yeah, right now, as you guys know, it's lockdown and diving activities are not allowed. We really hope that everything will change quite soon. But I believe snorkeling is semi-allowed, right?
It depends how friendly you are with your barangay captain.
Gotcha.
I'm friends with mine, so I'm safe.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much for joining, everyone. Marco is asking if you're going to be around in September. I think he will. He's been there for 6 years. I don't think he's going anywhere.
I'll be around. And just a shout out to Marco and Colin, 2 of my students. Colin actually stayed at Atlantis. I think he won some contest on your guys' Instagram a couple months ago. So he's been spreading the frogfish love there for me already. Marco, I'm here. I'm sure I'll see you in September, wherever you stay, wherever you're diving. We'll hook up. No worries about that.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel. And we have recorded this presentation, so it will be available in our website. And I will send an email to everybody with the link, because we've got a lot of people from Oz and New Zealand who wanted to participate, but it was way too late for them. So we'll put that link. I'll send an email out to everybody with the link for this presentation if you want to see it again. And we are looking forward to seeing you soon in the Philippines, soon at Atlantis. Thank you so much, Daniel. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a good day, afternoon, night. And we wish all of you a safe time. Please stay safe, and see you soon underwater.
Thank you, guys. See you here to find some frogfish, hopefully soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.